Hello everybody, or anybody, anybody that might listen to this video. Hot off the back of the last video in terms of the Freedom of Information request that I put in to Countess of Chester Hospital, in which they basically stonewall everything and said that we can't give you any information with regard to infection control over I asked for the years 2014 to 2017, and any remedies that they'd used in terms of any infections that had spread over that period of time, what were the infections, etc., etc. We see today, the next day, or is it a couple of days after anyway, a couple of days I think, isn't it? 3rd of August, article in the Telegraph. Some people can't seem to get this up without seeing a paywall, but for some reason I can see it. I don't buy the Telegraph or anything, but I can see the article. It's by Sarah Napton, or Knapton, I think, science editor of the Telegraph. The title is, I'll put a little screenshot of it before this video. So it's just been published today. Hospital where Lucy Letby worked suffered bacteria outbreak, and in quotes, lethal to babies. Leaked risk report. So somebody's leaked it from the Countess of Chester Hospital, I presume. Or is it possibly even a company that they used to do these infection control measures that was outside the NHS? We don't know. Somebody's leaked it from somewhere. I would have thought it was the hospital in some respect. That's another story of its own. I was just speaking with my friend about who might have leaked that and for what reason. Are they trying to control? Is it possible they're trying to control how this story evolves? How the narrative is obviously changing, and they're trying to control what the possible further ramifications there'll be once the miscarriage of justice is overturned. Maybe. We don't know. So there's a picture of Lucy there, and it's very interestingly, it's not a picture of Lucy from the trial or when she's been arrested. It's a picture of her as a nurse when she's it's a really lovely picture of her, and felt quite sort of affected by seeing that, because the media now, obviously, they're aware of things are changing. David Davis's involvement and his probe or campaign in this, in which he's going to ask questions in Parliament, and he's getting a lot of people coming to him with from medical and scientific backgrounds. A lot of information is being fed into that now, so he's obviously acting as a spearhead in this thing. He's even said that he would want to visit Lucy Letby in prison. So how far have we come in this last year? An incredible distance. Anyway, I'll read a bit of this article, which is in the Telegraph, and I'll put the link below. Hopefully you can see it. It won't be a paywall. It's not bringing up a paywall for me for some reason. The neonatal unit where Lucy Letby worked suffered an outbreak of bacteria lethal to babies, a leaked risk report shows. Excuse me. In August 2023, Lucy Letby was convicted of the murders of 7 newborns and the attempted murders of 6 other infants. A retrial in July also found her guilty of the attempted murder of another child. Since the conviction, numerous scientists, statisticians and doctors have expressed their concern about the evidence presented to the jury regarding shift patterns, medical conclusions and the standard of care at the Countess of Chester. It has now emerged that at the time when infant mortality rates spiked at the Countess of Chester Hospital between 2015 and 2016, the years which Lucy Letby was convicted of killing the infants, the bacterium Pseudomonas aeruginosa had colonised taps in the nurseries of the neonatal unit, including intensive care. You know, this is what Dr. Scott McLachlan was writing about last September or August, you know, and other people as well were looking into all that, and all the signs were there from the medical notes of sepsis and necrotizing enterocolitis. A bit hard for me to say that. So all the signs were there anyway, but it's coming out. Someone's leaking it. Why they're leaking it, I'm not exactly sure, but I'm glad they are leaking it. It's very interesting that they their response to me and the FOI is basically, we're not saying anything here. So the only way this could come out was through a leak here. They weren't going to do it voluntarily. And someone's let the Telegraph know about it. And I had assumed that somebody had let the Guardian know about this, because we were waiting for another article from the Guardian, presumably by Felicity Lawrence, which was said to be another bombshell article about this story or case situation, in which a presumption had been that they'd linked up something like this, that there'd been a discovery of a contemporaneous to 2015, 2016 bacteria cause for the sepsis in all the babies here. And there's obviously documented proof of that now. Well, there's documented proof that this infection, this bacteria, was on the ward. We know that. The bacteriums, did I read that? Pseudomonas aeruginosa had colonised taps in the nurseries of the neonatal unit, including intensive care. Well, Pseudomonas is known to be lethal to vulnerable babies. This is a crux point coming up here. In 2012, so just 3 years before, a premature baby died and 12 others needed treatment at Southmead Hospital in Bristol after an outbreak of a waterborne bacterium. 3 premature babies also died after contracting the bug, same one, at the Royal Jubilee Maternity Hospital in Belfast in January 2012, again a few years before. How many other neonatal wards throughout the UK where, similar to here, they didn't release it at the time. They didn't release this to the... Did the defence know about this? Did they ask about it? Did the police know about it? Did they ask about it? Remember Detective Paul Hughes and his "I wish it was a bad bug in the water"? We were hoping it was a bad bug in the water. But we know now contemporaneously that they knew there was a quote-unquote bad bug in the water. What did they do with that information? Were they not given it? Were the police not given it? Did the NHS keep it from the police? Or did the police not want to know about it because they wanted to make a murderer? They wanted to create a murderer. They'd rather the serial killer story. What happened? Hopefully all that's going to come out and everyone accountable will be held accountable. So I've read that the Royal Jubilee Hospital in Belfast, 3 premature babies died there. In that case, the one in Belfast, sink taps were found to be the source of the infection. Well, we already know that the sinks and the toilets were backed up with hospital wastewater, leaking sewage, in other words, and everything else that might come out of a hospital. All the other potential infections that are coming out through those pipes and dripping in the crawl spaces above the unit itself. As a continual problem, again and again and again and again, as was evidence was given for that in the trial by the plumber. So I've read that. A baby died from the same infection 6 weeks earlier in Derry, so that was another case as well. Another section here, bacteria, quote, can be lethal in newborns, close quote. David Livermore, Professor of Medical Microbiology at the University of East Anglia, said, quote, Pseudomonas aeruginosa is an environmental organism that likes moisture. He goes on to say, it can be lethal in newborns, especially premature ones who lack a properly developed immune system. And so many of these newborns had other compromising health issues, as well as the lack of medical care and a proper medical structure there to run a level 2 neonatal unit, where they were running at a level beyond their capabilities. On top of that as well, he also goes on to say, David Livermore, Professor Livermore says, from mid-2015 to mid-2016, there were around 17 infant deaths at the Countess of Chester unit. He says around, and that's a good thing to say because nobody actually knows, because of this other issue of mispresenting early neonatal deaths as stillbirths, and I think they've done that in at least 2 cases. I have another Freedom of Information request in at the moment with regard to 2 of those, to get something from the horse's mouth, as it were, to establish whether they'd actually done that for the 2 deaths in August and October 2015. And I believe they may have done, and they may have done more. May have done more than that. So I think there's, across 2015, 2016, I believe there's at least 19 deaths, if not more. We just don't know at the moment because of them playing fast and loose with the coding of the deaths. So Professor Livermore, still quoting here, we are asked to believe that this comprised 2 superimposed clusters. We are asked to believe that this comprised 2 superimposed clusters, one of 7 murders by Lucy Letby, and one where, to quote the Crown prosecution expert, they died for the usual problems why small babies die: hemorrhage, infection, congenital problems. He's talking about Evans, that's what Evans used to say. So they're all the explainable and expected deaths that he glibly states that he understands why it all happened. And all the other ones are when Lucy's on duty are all murders. But all the other ones are easily explainable. That's why I've always thought the key to this is, one of the keys, there's many keys. One of the keys is the part that's in shadow, and it's why and how Evans deliberates in his great knowledge and his great wisdom, this oracle and genius, Dowie Evans, how he works out which ones are explainable as well as the unexplainable, and on what basis. And we never see any of that. None of that's ever shown in court. He just lists these things here: hemorrhage, infection, congenital problems. He's obviously missing out. The fact that, like he's saying here, there are 2 superimposed clusters here. But Evans is delineating which ones are murders and which ones are infection. And he's doing that on the basis of who's on duty when. And therein lies the corruption and the collusion with the police and the NHS. In that dark mixture of those 3 elements, therein lies that about which and how those cases, so-called, were chosen by Evans. He hasn't done it just by chance, put it that way. He's been guided. They've worked together on this. It's a group effort at collusion, as I've said all along. Professor Livermore goes on to say, it is simpler to believe that we're looking at a single spike of fatal infections in a chaotic unit. Absolutely, 100%, Professor Livermore. Then there's a picture of the neonatal unit, their photograph. Hopefully you'll be able to see the article. The risk report leaked to the Telegraph. We wonder who leaked that and why. And why now? Who, why, and why now? I'm glad it's happened, obviously. It's brilliant that it's happened in terms of justice and getting the truth out, getting Lucy Letby freed so she can begin to her life again, and obviously getting the truth to the parents as well, and to the wider community and to everyone. The risk report leaked to the Telegraph showed that the Countess of Chester Hospital had been dealing with Pseudomonas since at least May 2015. Well, that's an interesting month, isn't it? Considering there are some deaths earlier in that year. I think from memory now, there are 2 other deaths earlier in that year. But that's why they say here at least. So it's quite possible all the deaths in 2015, Pseudomonas is implicated in those, possibly. But obviously there's the big spike happening in June 2016. But the biggest concentration of deaths, as I mentioned in a previous video, is between October 2015 and March 2016, none of which end up on the indictment blamed on Lucy Letby. But that's the biggest concentration of deaths over these 2 years, 2015, 2016. So that's where Pseudomonas is going to be involved, I would suspect. Well, it's for all of it potentially, but that's the bigger spike across those years in terms of intensity of deaths over the shortest period. It's not the period in which Lucy Letby is accused of the most murders. She's not accused of any murders between those 2 months, the months of October 2015 and March. It's either March or April 2016. I'm just doing it from memory now. But there's this 7 month period in which none of those deaths are on the indictment, but that's the most intense period for deaths over those 2 years. I did that in a previous video at quite some length. At least, so it's going back to the article, at least May 2015, when there were fears about transferring babies from nearby Arrow Park Hospital, about transferring them from there. Oh, right. So that's suggesting that's an element of the report, is that somebody was saying, we don't want you transferring babies here because of this risk. They always knew, they always do know. Everyone involved in this knows about this. And that's what they were prepared to do, to let somebody, an innocent person, stay in prison for the rest of their life, to cover it up. But this is just the tip of an iceberg. It's the tip of an iceberg about neonatal units across the whole country. That's what it is, really. That's what it is. And maybe not just neonatal units, many other units as well. The risk score was reduced in August 2015. Oh, that's interesting. When there had been no infections in neonates. But in December 2015, a tap in intensive care tested positive for the bug and had to be replaced. It's all fitting in. This has just literally come out today. In December 2015, so why is that such an interesting month that they tested positive for Pseudomonas in 2015? It goes back to a previous video I did in which I looked at the FOI deaths across those 2 years, well, across several years. But I said one of the major spikes was in January 2016, the very next month, where there were 3 deaths, none of which attributed to Lucy Letby. None of which attributed to Lucy Letby. That's a spike that nobody seemed to be interested in terms of the law, in terms of the hospital, in terms of Breary or the other character, Jayaram, or Evans, or the police. January 2016, the very month after they found Pseudomonas on this tap in December 2015. And you get this big spike in January of 3 deaths in 1 month. 3 deaths in 1 month, January 2016. None of the deaths on the indictment. The same amount of deaths, just one death fewer in that 1 month, 2016, than there was in the whole of 2014. And the same as the amount of deaths in 2013 in 1 month. And nobody's looking at that as a spike at the time or since or throughout the trial. Nobody's talking about it. And now we can see why it happened. Well, it sounds incredibly likely, doesn't it? They find the test positive for the bug, so-called the bug, in 2015. The bad bug in the water, the bad bug over the taps, the bad bug on hands, the bad bug as aerosol, I can't say the word, vaporized or just basically you can't see it, creating biofilm in all kinds of areas, over equipment, on hands, on uniforms, on the incubators, on the taps, on the toilets, on the floor, on the wall, in the ceiling, in the air. All this happening and never being properly addressed, and then them taking more and more high acuity babies as it's happening, as they know it's there, and covering it up. Which is why they didn't want to reply to their FOI, so it was leaked. Okay. So it had to be. So they replaced the tap, but what does it suggest about where else it might be? Well, it's going to be all over the shop there, isn't it? And that's why you get the 3 deaths in January. One of the biggest spikes throughout that period of time. Again, I know I keep repeating myself, but I want to be clear. None of which were attributable or attributed to Lucy Letby. None were on the indictment. In the same month, a tap in another baby ward was also tested positive, but the report warned that there was no capacity to replace it. So filters were fitted instead. Oh my God, so that was tested as positive, and they didn't even replace it. But they just carried on getting high acuity babies in there in the same month. Another reason why you had that spike in January 2016 of 3 deaths. Another reason. The report said the filters will remain in place until we get the all clear. It's a basket case. Notes show that by the middle of February 2016, staff had still not received this confirmation. Still not received the confirmation. In February 2016, they've just had January 2016 with 3 deaths in 1 month. And no one's putting it together. No one's putting it together at the time, then. But you got Jayaram and Brewery chatting crap in the lunch queue about Lucy Letby being a murderer. When you got all this going on. Come on. The next section in bold here is Pseudomonas and, quote, urgent threat, close quote, to babies. Pseudomonas, an urgent threat to babies. The risk of the bacteria was designated as high, and the unit brought in controls to prevent the spread, including limiting visitors and treating all babies, quote, as if they had a severe infection. Oh, God. And yet in the court case, and Evans's ridiculous lies and fraudulent crap, it's all about saying they're all stable and they're all in good condition and there's no signs of infection here, and they didn't die because of infection, they died of being murdered, or in a whole host of different ways that he made up, that he pulled out of his arse, Evans, and the police went with, and then Bowen just rubber stamped. And yet at the same time they're treating as all the babies as though they had in severe infection, and then all that gets changed and lost. So in the court case, none of that's going on, and all the babies are stable, and they're all fine, and you never get an unexpected death, and you never get an unexplained death or an unexplained crash. And you get Detective Hughes saying, no, everyone's aware when it's always going to happen. Everything's explainable and everything's expected. It's sick, isn't it? It's all coming out now. It's sick. Thank God it's coming out, though. We're at the beginning we're at the end of the beginning, I think, here. The end of the beginning of the truth. So there's a lot more to come, but it's really cracking open now. The risk register said that although estate staff were monitoring the taps and testing the water supply frequently, it was, quote, only as good as the last test and does not guarantee the patient's, parents, visitors or staff safety. Well, exactly. What's happening in the interim? So you get this test where they didn't even change the tap in December 2015. You got 2 issues with 2 taps, one they don't even bother changing. You get 3 deaths in January 2016, and they've still had no confirmation that everything was clear by February 2016. Subsequent to those 3 deaths, it's just incredible. Well, it's not incredible. I believe it. It's not absolutely believable, and absolutely believable that they would cover it all up. It gets worse. The US Centre for Disease Control's Prevention and Response branch told the Telegraph that Pseudomonas was, quote, an urgent threat to babies in intensive care, and warned symptoms of an infection could sometimes be subtle and cause or exacerbate other conditions. Yeah, and so many of those babies had other conditions. They were up against it in so many other ways, as well as their extreme prematurity, as well as the absolute basket case of bad medical care from the doctors there, and absent medical care and mistakes and errors and lack of experience on top of it all. There's a little box here in which you can find out more about Pseudomonas in the article, so you can look at that at more length. There's a further quote from this US Centre of Disease Control. In our experience, mortality rates during Pseudomonas aeruginosa outbreaks can be high, a spokesman said. They go on to quote, neonatal intensive care unit patients often have defects in their immune system. They're not fully developed and are often subject to large amounts of very invasive care, exactly, especially when you got untrained or inexperienced doctors like doing intubations 5 or 6 times, or trying to put lines in 6 or 7 times and not being able to do it again and again and again, because they're not up to running this level 2 unit here. So you get somebody come in from a level 3 unit and does the procedure straight away because they know how to do it, they've got the skills to do it. But you've got these very, very junior doctors here with virtually no consultant support. They're mostly absent. Jayaram's off on his television stuff all the time. While all this is going on, mind you, while all the time that all this has been found out, when it's first found out, according to this, in 2015, Ravi Jayaram's doing interview after interview for his television program, I've looked through all his Facebook for the first half of 2015 and into the summer there, and it's just all, he's away from work, just doing interviews about his TV program. That's what he's doing. And they're doing 2 ward rounds a week. They should be doing it a couple a day, or at least 1 a day, and they're doing 2 a week, the rest of them. And Gibbs is hardly ever there. We know that. We know that from way back when, where you've just got these very inexperienced junior doctors there who don't know how to do these procedures, and they're having to ring Gibbs up at home all the time. Jai Oram's off to doing some telly thing, some interview on the One Show or morning TV. Gibbs is at home most of the time. Breary, God knows. Dr. B, we don't know. But we do know from Alison Timmis, one of the other consultants, that they were completely drowning. They were drowning there, and she wrote that. As I said in other videos, she wrote that email to Tony Chambers saying, the result's going to be the deaths of children. It's curious that she didn't put anything about infection there. I wonder if she knew. She should have known. Everyone should have known there. All the consultants should have known about it. They did. They must have known. They did know. They must have known, mustn't they, that this was going on, because there was obviously, they say here, there was a policy of treating all the babies as though they had a severe infection. So if that's the protocol they're operating, they all know. They all know. But at the same time, there's a whispering campaign about a murderer, because they don't want it to be Pseudomonas aeruginosa. They want it to be a murderer instead. Why would they do that? Why? What was I reading there? Is from this American US Centre for Disease Control. Neonatal intensive care units often have defects in their immune system and are often subject to a large amount of very invasive care, which make them very susceptible to infections and healthcare pathogens, and also, when infected, at high risk for adverse outcomes, including death and severe infection. And you've got the fact of you've got triplets and twins here. That increases the mortality rate as well. Just the fact of being a premature twins and triplets. So you've got all these other factors here, but they've just created a serial killer out of whole cloth, out of. It's just stunning. I just can't. But that's what they've gone for, create a scapegoat. All these other things going on that they're all aware of at the time. They're not going to be able to say, we didn't realise it was going on. They knew it was going on at the time. At the time that they were persecuting someone and trying to blame an innocent person. They knew all this was going on at the time. We know that now. I always suspected it, but we know it now. Explicitly. A bit more of that quote from that same group. So they're at high risk of adverse outcomes, including death and severe infection. Well, that's exactly what they were here, whether the crashes or the deaths. That's what we're looking at, isn't it? As neonates have little capacity to compensate for additional stresses, plus they've got the stresses of all the failures of medical care as well, and all those repeated procedures, repeated lines being put in the wrong place, and having to be withdrawn, put in, intubations in and out all the time, because they're not doing it properly, because the doctors don't have the sufficient skills, completely insufficient consultant cover, insufficient number of nurses. Lucy Letby was there trying to do her very, very best in an incredibly stressful position. Without her, there would have been many more deaths. There would have been more deaths without her there. It's sick what they've done. Well, we know that. We know it's sick what they've done, what these evil people have done, really, all the way along the line. I read that bit, did I? Yeah. As neonates, they've got little capacity to compensate for additional stresses. Infection can cause other problems in these patients that are not directly related to the infection. Exactly. But Evans can see all through that, can't he? He doesn't have to care about that, does he? Because he's able just to decide which ones are murders. He can pick and choose. He can cherry pick them, and they were cherry picked for him. And he knew which ones he had to pick. Well, I've gone over that ad infinitum. I think this is the last little section here. It's called Outbreak of a Virus. One mother, whose baby was at the unit in 2016, said that she had been told that there was an outbreak of a virus on the ward. She'd been told that. And her son was the only infant not infected. And her son was the only infant not infected in 2016. It is not known if she was referring to the Pseudomonas bacterial incident or a separate viral outbreak. Could be another one. Could be the same one or another one. Either way, that their intention is to control it all, as we see, that's why they didn't want to answer the FOI, isn't it? Speaking to the Mail's trial of Lucy Letby podcast, that's the Daily Mail, the anonymous mother said, quote, "A matron came upstairs to me while I was an inpatient for 2 weeks and said that there was a virus on the unit and that all the babies have got to stay in the rooms that they're in and we were not accepting any new babies. She seemed very panicked. And it left me thinking at the time, oh my gosh, what is going on?" Well, you would, wouldn't you? Quote, "My son was the only one that apparently didn't have this virus. They didn't want him getting it because he was so small. He was still on the oxygen at the time, as were so many of these other babies. Tiny, high acuity, very, very premature babies with between them a whole host of other medical problems and issues that they had." There's another little section here. Bacterial infection never mentioned. Now we come into it with regard to the trial. During Lucy Letby's trial, it emerged that there had been major problems with plumbing in the hospital, and on one occasion human waste or sewage entered the neonatal intensive care room from the drains of a ward above, as well as all in the sinks and the toilets as well. There's another picture there of the old unit there. However, the bacterial infection problems in the unit were never mentioned, neither during the trial nor in, this is amazing as well, so neither at the trial were they mentioned, nor in a report by the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health, the RCPCH report, who investigated the high mortality rates at the unit in 2017. That's not strictly correct. They reported in 2017, but they actually were on the unit in September of 2016. So that's a crucial issue there in this report. They reported in 2017, as it says here. But it doesn't say they reported, it's just they investigated then. Their investigations were actually in September 2016. So that's crucial to get that right. I'm going to have to tweet about that because that's an important factor. They're suggesting that they came in the following year, but it wasn't that. They came in September 2016, a couple of months after Lucy Letby had been put on this admin job. Professor Livermore added, although the Pseudomonas colonisation was known at this time of the RCPCH report, of course it was not mentioned. So did they tell the RCPCH that and the RCPCH independently decided not to mention it? I think that's less likely than them not telling the RCPCH. I think it's more likely that they did not tell the RCPCH. They held it back from them. They covered it up. That's what I think is more likely. Do you think that? Rather than the RCPCH hearing and knowing about it and just ignoring it. Why? It says here, why, especially given the Belfast deaths from 2012, were they told? So why? I made a dog's dinner of that. Professor Livermore added, although the Pseudomonas colonisation was known at the time of the RCPCH report, it was not mentioned. Why, especially given the Belfast deaths, he asks. Were they told? ? Well, I suspect they weren't told. I don't think they were told and they decided not to put it in their report. I thought they would have put that in the report had they known. I would hope so. I think it's much more likely they simply weren't told. Quote, or it might be remiss of them that they didn't actually ask the right questions. But they should have been proactively told. Because the reason they've been asked in by the hospital was to look at reasons for the spike in deaths. So the hospital the onus is upon them to give proactively as much relevant information to the RCPCH as possible. It's also incumbent on the RCPCH to ask the right questions as well and see all the right people. They go on to say here, this is Professor Livermore again, did they speak to the infection control team, given that infection was such a plausible cause of clustered deaths? These are yet more questions that the Thirlwall inquiry needs to address. Absolutely it does. Absolutely it does. Did they speak to them? If they didn't even bother to speak to them, that's a terrible failure by the RCPCH, but it's also a failure of the hospitals, of the trust, which should have proactively ensured that that information was given to the RCPCH. So are both at fault, or was this information deliberately kept and hidden from the RCPCH, actively hidden? Is this a further level of corruption here? That's quite possible, isn't it? It's quite possible. The Thirlwall inquiry has been set up to look at problems at the Countess of Chester during the period where Lucy Letby was convicted of murdering babies. Well, what it's going to turn into is something very different now, is to simply look at the problems at the Countess of Chester during the period in which somebody was scapegoated for the spike in deaths at the Countess of Chester Hospital. That's what it's really going to be now. The Telegraph has asked the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health whether it was informed about the Pseudomonas outbreak while it was investigating the high mortality rates, but it said it could not comment while the inquiry was ongoing. So they're all doing the same thing. We can't comment. We can't comment. They either know that they're in serious trouble for either deliberately going along to cover it up, or that they were a victim of the cover-up of the hospital and that it was actively hidden from them. Was it passively hidden from them in the sense that the RCPCH failed to ask the right questions or even ask the infection control team, in which case their report is a complete failure because they failed to do that? Or did they ask them and they were given the incorrect information deliberately, i.e. that there hasn't been any Pseudomonas found? It's a very dark mixture, this. We just don't know. We don't know how deep the corruption goes here, and was there an agreement between the RCPCH and the hospital to keep quiet about it? Or were the RCPCH acting in good faith and the infection control team were told by the management, don't tell them about this, don't tell them about this? Or did the RCPCH fail to even ask them? But then that would be a terrible thing that they did, but then it's also always a terrible thing that the hospital did in not proactively telling them about it. Even if they did a shoddy report, the RCPCH, and they didn't ask what they should have asked. It's incumbent on the hospital, for the hospital, who are asking the RCPCH to do the investigation, to actively give them the information that they've established that Pseudomonas was on that ward. And they should be able to put two and two together, like seeing that they found it on the taps in December 2015, in 2 instances, and one they didn't even replace the tap, and you got a spike in January 2016 of 3 deaths. But none of that's in their report, so it's very dark, this, it's very murky. Will we ever know? Well, we should know. We should know. It should all come out. The Thirlwall inquiry has been set up. Yes, I read that. The Telegraph asked the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health whether it was informed about the Pseudomonas outbreak while it's investigating the high mortality rates, but it said it could not comment. I've just repeated myself, haven't I? It said it could not comment while the inquiry was coming to the end now. A spokesman for the Countess of Chester Hospital NHS Foundation Trust said, quote, due to the ongoing police investigations and the pending public inquiry, it would not be appropriate to answer or provide advice on the questions asked at this time, which is exactly what they said to me in that FOI request. Same thing. They know it's all coming out. They absolutely know that Lucy Letby is going to be freed. They know it. I think everyone involved, I think the police know it. I think they know it all, but it's all about how was talking with my friend tonight, and I agree with what my friend was saying, that it's about that they're trying to manage the repercussions of what the overturning of this miscarriage of justice will mean, what the repercussions will be, the extent of them, and how much damage they will do to so many institutions. The criminal justice system, the police, the NHS, the idea of court-appointed experts, issues around juries in trials like this, but that's an aspect of the criminal justice system. What else? The media, the role of the media in monitoring someone like this, in creating this fervour to damn someone. Obviously, the police have said that. So the ramifications are huge. They're massive. The NHS ones are huge. And for some of those parents, and perhaps all of them, they'll go back to a situation that some of them certainly were in early 2017, where they were represented by a Chester solicitor, awaiting the beginning of medical negligence cases that were about to be brought against this NHS trust. They were just on the cusp of that when the police investigation began. And obviously I've missed out the gang of 4 consultants that were so highly involved in constructing this scapegoating operation, this bullying operation. I don't know whether they had any inclination that it would have turned out in the way it would, but I think they wanted Lucy Letby off the unit. They wanted to bully somebody off the unit, and they just went with this all the way along. And I hope that none of them are sleeping at night. They shouldn't be sleeping at night. They should be. Same with Evans and Co. and Bowen and everyone involved in Operation Hummingbird. They shouldn't be getting any sleep, because it's unstoppable now. As I said earlier near the beginning of the video, what's going to coalesce around what David Davis is doing now is going to be something that's so solid, and they won't be able to be pushed aside, as Liz Hull said in a horrific Daily Mail article recently, in which she basically termed everyone who thought or believed Lucy Letby to be innocent as either ghouls or misfits, or ghouls that were misfits, or misfit ghouls. Anyway, ghouls and misfits. She won't be able to do that anymore, and nobody will be able to do that anymore. It's not just the ghouls and misfits. It's never been the ghouls and misfits. It's just been people that realised intuitively initially that something was profoundly wrong, and then that's grown over this last year, because it's been a year now. It's just been over a year, and for some people it's been more than a year. But for speaking personally, it starts with a profoundly intuitive response, a deep intuitive response, and then a year's worth of reading, listening, and reading what all these other people that I've constantly mentioned in my videos and directed anyone who's watched these videos to their work. There's a whole list of them. I won't list them all again. You know who they are. I put links to all their work on most of the videos here. If you've watched any number of these videos, you'll know who I'm talking about, and they've been doing it for a long time now, and all that work is still out there and it's ongoing. And I've got to catch up with Dr. McConville's podcasts. I've taken a little bit of a step back from it recently. I'm still following it on Twitter, but I've not been as up to date as I have before. But I felt I had to do this video today, especially off the back of the last video with regard to that Freedom of Information request. And there it comes, bang! It comes right in. All that information that it was very reasonable to infer that they were covering up, as by their absolute silence from that FOI request. It's just exploded out today, literally today. in the Telegraph, and there'll be more to come. There will be much, much more to come. The levels of collusion that I believe and corruption that's involved with the police and Evans and the NHS here, those consultants as a spearhead, but then the NHS per se thereafter, so layered and so dark, such a kind of vortex of collusion and corruption. I'm not sure all the strands of that will ever come out. I think it's reasonable to infer a lot of them through a logical process of seeing how they've constructed. It's been my main approach here, is to try to understand how they've constructed this framing device of an innocent person and look at all the clear, how you can clearly see the shape of it. Anyway, I'll leave it there. I'll put the link below to this Telegraph article. I hope you can get through, and it doesn't show a paywall. For some reason I can see it, other people are seeing a paywall. But I've read it through there, word for word there, so all the best to you. And I think it's, with regard to Lucy Letby being freed, returned to her family and friends, it's not a case of if, it's a case of when. And they should just do, if there's any people within that system with any sense of justice at all, they've got to expedite it and do it as quickly as possible now. And if they do insist on a retrial, I doubt it's going to come to a retrial. I think the conviction is going to be quashed. I don't think there will be a retrial. I think it will be quashed as unsafe, and they won't, because the system is in ultra self-protection mode. The system being all the elements involved, including the NHS, but the criminal justice system is in ultra self-protection mode. So is the police. They really wouldn't want a retrial. They wouldn't want the publicity of it. And this is why when I spoke with my friend, and she was saying about, is it possible that they're kind of managing the response now, because they know they can't stop it coming out, so they're managing how it comes out now. And they're trying to control how the narrative is. The narrative has changed. Mark McDonald, KC, talked about changing the narrative. I think the narrative has changed. There's still a lot of people out there who are very ignorant and just say, they still believe the headlines from a year ago, but the number of people that know that this is completely terrible, what's happened to Lucy Letby, is growing exponentially day on day. People feel a lot more confidence to voice that now on social media. I think there are millions of people that know that something wrong here. What was I saying? Yeah, so is it the case that they know it has to be overturned, and they're trying to manage how that's done? Well, as long as it is overturned, and then everything else that needs to be dealt with is for later. And obviously the parents have to find out what the reason was, why their babies died, and no doubt some of them, well, I don't know if some of them would have read this article, but there's going to be, legal representation and solicitors wanting to represent those parents again in terms of what actually happened to those babies on that unit over this period, and the failures like not even replacing a tap, the failures of continuing to run as a level 2 unit when you've got pseudomonas on the unit and you're completely understaffed and you haven't got the high enough number of doctors or consultants or nurses even to even run that unit, or even incubators or equipment or space. You haven't got the capacity, you haven't got the skill level, you haven't got none of the metrics are being met, which also came out in the RCPCH report. And that's why, and other people have said this, of course, that's why, if it was all just about a serial killer, I would say that it's inverted commas, a quote serial killer, and it was nothing to do with that unit, why has it remained a level 1 unit since July 2016, 8 years later, and they haven't gone back up to a level 2? The serial killer, quote unquote, has gone 8 years ago, but they haven't been put up to level 2 again, because there never should have been one. And as Dr. McConville says, they were in name operating as one, but they weren't fit to operate as one. They weren't a level 2 unit. They didn't have the skills, and those consultants have got a lot to answer for, those 4. Breary, Chayar, and Dr. B, whoever she is. Hopefully that will come out, who she is. I don't think these people should have any anonymity at all. And Gibbs. And there's other people involved as well with that. But anyway, I'll leave it there. I didn't think it'd be that long, this video. Take care. It's all very positive for Lucy Letby, and it's positive for the truth. I hope this information is getting to... I would hope that Lucy Letby's parents and friends and all her other supporters and relations and friends that have stuck by her and colleagues that have stuck by her are seeing these articles. No doubt they are. And they're taking heart from them, and they realise that, as I said, it's not a case of if Lucy Letby will be released and the verdict's quashed. It's a case of when. It's a case of when now. And we know that now. Thank you. Bye-bye.